You are live.
Excellent. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Ben, and I am one of the teachers here at the Academy of Gaming, Film and Animation. And what we're going to be looking at today is how to model the scene that you are looking at right here. So a few of the students in class have had a bit of experience now modeling shields and swords and doing a bit of extra things. So we're just sort of building on that sort of knowledge to try and sort of break this down step by step and actually look at how we would model all these different shapes and then put them together. So this is based on this model here on Sketchfab, which is by this artist here, OSGate. And basically what's really good about this website here on Sketchfab, and if you follow the Word document that's up on Daymap and the link, is you can click down here on Model Inspector and actually click here on Wireframe and see what's actually happening underneath the hood and everything. So this is really good when you're starting out and trying to figure out how to model things, because you can just look at these models and just get a bit of a clue as to how they modeled each of these. Okay, so yeah, without any further ado, I am going to start going through how I would model this. Now again, this isn't the only way to model this, and there's a million different ways of doing it. So if you want to try and do your own way, you can, and just get started on that and just see how you go, and then check back with the stream later to see on any places that you're stuck. That is cool as well. But this is just a guide on just how I would go about it, and yeah, just to help people who are just getting started with Maya. So it'd be a little bit slower, a little bit more sort of deliberate, just so everyone knows what we're doing. So whenever I'm starting with a building, I'll always just try and get the basic sort of outline of the building. So in here you can see we've got this sort of, if I get out my drawing tool, so you know we've got this sort of box here that's like that. And then we've also got this sort of back room here, and then a little extension on the end just here. So it's kind of like this L shape. So I'm just going to start by modeling that, but I'm also going to loop cut in where the door is going to be and where the window is going to be. I'm going to start with a sort of more flat sort of shape and then extrude out once I've got those sort of things in place. So back here in Maya, I'm going to grab my cube, going to make it a little bit taller, a little bit wider, a little bit deeper, like so. Again, I can change these a little bit later if I need to. Now, I'm going to go up here to loop cut or insert edge loop. To insert an edge loop, I can't click on the face, I have to actually click on the edge that I want it to loop cut on. Now, unfortunately, I've got mine locked into a system, so if you have that problem, just double click on here and then change that to relative distance, and now I can left click and drag that across to where I want it. I drag it into that sort of line there. And as soon as I'm finished with that tool, I've got to click up here on the arrow, because otherwise it'll just keep creating more edge loops, and I don't want that. So I'm going to click here on this arrow here. I'm going to right click with my mouse over that mesh to bring up all the different mesh options. So edge, vertex, and face. I click here on face and click on that one there. Going to make sure I haven't accidentally selected any other faces on the mesh. And then either press Control E or go up here to edit mesh and go down to extrude. Now it's going to give me this widget that's going to kind of look like a combination of the move widget and the scale widget. No matter where this blue arrow is facing, that's always the local translate. So I'm going to left click and drag on that and just bring it out to about there. And that's all I'm going to do for this sort of part here. So now I'm going to start looking at getting that sort of curved sort of roof there and everything. So I'm going to right click. Yeah, people who are in the classroom who want to try having a go at that, getting to that point can. Couple of things that may happen. If you accidentally see this happen, don't panic. It's a feature. It allows you to see inside your mesh. Basically just means you've clicked on vertex face instead of vertex. To get back into object mode so I can move the whole object, I need to right click and hold and go to object and go to there. So yeah, that's pretty much where we want to sort of get to, is just having this basic outline. Yours might be slightly different dimensions. Like I said, we can always change them a little bit later, but I'm just blocking in the main sort of form just for now.
Cool, so I reckon delete that, do it again, and then people try and follow at the same time.
Okay. So just to go through that all again. So I'm going to go over here and click on the cube. Can also go up here to create, polygon primitives, and cube, just in case that shelf has disappeared, which sometimes it might. I'm going to click over here on my move to move this in. Then I'm going to go over here on the scale tool. I'm just going to scale it up I'm just going to bring it up a little bit just so it's sitting on that grid, just so I've got an idea about where I want my floor to be. To rotate your view around, you just hold down the Alt key and left click and drag around like so. You can also click on my middle mouse button or the wheel and just click on it to move left and right like that. And then I'm going to, as I did in there, stretch this out a bit, and then we're going to put a loop cut down the middle here. So to do that, I'm just going to go up here to Mesh Tools, go to Insert Edge Loop. That'll bring up this little tool. Whatever active tool you have will always appear down here. So if I accidentally click away and I use the Move tool or Scale tool, I can always just get the last tool I used just by clicking here. And I'm going to click and drag on edges, as it says in there. So I'm going to left click and drag it over to there. If you're finding that it, for whatever reason, is sort of locking in place, maybe because the last person who used it had it set to this, that basically just allows me to create equal edges like that, and I may not want to do that. Or I may want to do that and change that number there to 1, and then put that smack bang in the middle there if I wanted to. But if you don't, and you want to get a sort of eyeball it in, you can just go here to relative distance, and then that'll just allow you to left click and drag that into position. So once you have that in place, we then want to click on here, because if we keep clicking with this tool, it'll just keep creating more loop cuts. We also won't be able to get to different things, so we want to click on this little white arrow here to deactivate that tool. And make us Control Z on those ones. Right click and hold, go to face mode, click here on the face, and go Control E, and then got two options here. Can left click and drag on this blue arrow here, or can left click and drag on this local translate Z axis to bring that out however far I want to. Now again, this isn't the exact dimensions of this shanty house or anything like that, so I'll sort of change these a little bit later, so don't panic if it's not looking exactly right. We will fix that just a bit later. So I'll just get everyone a chance in class to get up to that point. Like I said, if you're already up to that point and you want to steam on ahead, by all means, do that as well. You know, if you're feeling confident and know what you want to do. But yeah, just for everyone else, if you want to get to that point, that'll be cool. Okay, so now we're going to look at the next part, which is going to be actually sort of raising this roof up here a little bit so that we can actually get that sort of curve on that loop. Okay, so if you have a look here on the side, you can see here there's a bit of that diagonal slant there and a little bit more dramatic here. So we're just going to put that in there. So back in this view here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and hold, and this time I'm going to go to edge mode. So edges are these little lines that connect up all the vertices. So we're just going to click here on this back one first. I'm going to hold down the shift key and select that one as well there. Got to make sure I haven't selected any of the other edges. And then I'm going to press the arrow key here to move this up just slightly like that. That's just going to put a little slant on it there. And then once that's done, I'm going to click here on this one and then just pull that down a little bit more as well. So we've got that slight slant and then that more sort of dramatic slant there and everything. And again, this is just going to be a basis for the rest of our building to go onto. So once we've got this shape, we're then just going to cut in some edge loops here for the door and the window, and then go from there. And then we'll start modeling out the galvanized iron and all the other sort of bits and pieces that are on there as well. Okay, so sorry for the back and forth on the stream and everything else like that. We're just helping a few people in class and getting to things to move along. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we can put in a door and a window. So we're going to use the edge loop tool. We're going to create one edge loop across here, and we're going to look at how we can flatten things out. And then we're going to have one down the bottom here to block out the windowsill, and then two across here, and then two across that way for the door as well. So to do that, I'm going to go insert edge loop, going to left click here, and you'll notice that the edge loop follows the slope of that sort of thing there, which we'll look at how to fix in just a second. But I'm just going to create another one that's just at the bottom of that window there. And then I'm going to create another one that goes across here and here. So we've got the width of the door, and then here to get to the width of the window. And once I've done all that, I'm going to click on my arrow here, and I'm just going to hold down Shift and double click on this line here to select the entire loop there. I'm going to press R on the keyboard or go over to the scale, and then left click and drag this down just so we can flatten this out. Now you'll notice that it sort of comes out the top here, so I've then just got to move that down again. And I'm going to do the same to this one here and scale that and then move that down as well, just to keep good topology as we're sort of moving along here. So if I notice that any of these are not really quite the way I want them, I can also move them as well just by using that same tool. So I click on one of the edge loops, hold down Shift and double click, and that selects the entire loop around. That just allows us to keep good topology, which is something that we'll talk about a little bit later, but it's a good habit to get into now. So once we've got that, we've now got the sort of lines drawn in where we can cut the faces. So we're going to right click and hold to go to face mode, select the face that I want to delete, and then press delete. I want to make sure I haven't accidentally selected any other faces, so it's good to just have a quick scan around and make sure we haven't accidentally deleted extra faces. And then for here, I can actually hold down Shift as well, double check to make sure I haven't selected any other faces, and then press delete. And so now what we have is we have our exterior of our building, but we also have our interior of our building. And this is very important when we're trying to create, especially game assets, and we want to be able to move inside and outside of our buildings. So that's that there. I'll let everyone try and catch up to that point, and then we'll come back and then we'll look at, okay, how do we get rid of some of these darker faces that are in the side here and thicken this out so that our walls aren't paper thin, because that's another important thing when it comes to game assets. Okay, so everyone seems to have gotten that really well, so that's great to see. What we're going to do now is we're going to go back to object mode. So the whole thing is now one object, and we're going to extrude. Now when we first do this, it's going to look like it's been turned inside out, so don't panic. And there are sort of limitations to using this technique and how you can use it. So if we press Ctrl E, that'll bring up this widget. You'll notice everything goes black and all the ones on the inside now are light. We're just going to pull out slightly on this blue arrow, or left click and drag on this local translate Z. And what that's going to do is just create that small thickness there that will just create interior faces and exterior faces. Now again, this is by no means a perfect sort of tool to use and everything, but again, we're just using it as a bit of a guide in this one, just to sort of help us to see where we're putting all the other sort of parts of this building. So as long as we've got that, that's all good. And now you can see we've got an interior and an exterior there. So I'll let everyone try and get up to that part, and then we'll start looking at the next part. We start actually modeling some of the other sort of shapes that are going to go onto this building. Okay, so yeah, some people have sort of mentioned here and everything. When you sort of do this technique, you will notice that sometimes if you pull this out a lot, it starts looking like a bouncy castle, which is not really what we're going for. So we're just going to do it slightly, just so that we've got enough that we can see interior faces and exterior faces. But basically what we're doing now is just using this as a guide so we can start putting things on it. So that when we start putting these other shapes, we've got that on there. So again, I've got a similar one here. There's a bit of a bracket down the bottom there and everything, which is the only difference. And now we're going to start looking at these shapes here. So how we can make one of these and start duplicating and rotating it around to start putting that all over the shed itself. And then we'll start looking at some of these other shapes that we use just to sort of finish that off. So back on this one, what we're going to do is this time we're going to create a plane. Now by default for most people you will see a sort of subdivided plane, so you will probably see something similar to this. Now if you have that, that's not a problem. Basically all we're going to do is just select this loop here by doing that, clicking on one, holding down shift, double clicking here, and we're doing every second row like that, and then we're just going to pull down. Now unfortunately I've accidentally selected this other thing in the background, so I've got to click back on this, and hopefully if I've gone back into edge loop those are still selected, but if not you may have to select them again, and then we're just going to pull down. Now this is a good start for creating a sort of galvanized sort of fence here and or corrugated sort of fence here and everything, but these edges here aren't very round. So what we're going to do is with those edges still selected, and if you have accidentally unselected them, all you got to do is just the same as we were saying there before, select one, double click, one, double click, so like that, and then we're just going to go up here to bevel. So bevel basically takes one edge, one face or one object and just rounds it off by increasing the number of faces. So we're just going to click here on bevel, and that'll give us, should have given us that, it did not, so what happened there? Cool, so it's like that. Then we're going to go bevel, and that'll give us that sort of look there. So we can change the amount of bevels by left clicking and dragging on this fraction here. So again, if we wanted something very flat like that, we could keep that. If we wanted it rounder, we could add more segments to it like that. I'm actually just going to keep it like that and keep it flat. But then we've got to do the same to these top parts here because they're still looking a bit pointy. So again, I'm just going to double click and select these edges at the top here. Unfortunately, it looks like this round edge at the end here is going to go all the way around. So I'm just going to have to select those individually. Like that. And once they're selected, I'm then going to go bevel and then just flatten those out there. And so what I have now is something that I can start moving around and duplicating over this shape to try and create this sort of corrugated fence sort of rooftop here. If I wanted a more dramatic sort of like loop here, I can change the scale like that and move it around. Now you may notice that whereas my scale widget follows the object, my move widget does not. To change that, all I need to do is double click on any of these tools here and then change it from world to object. And now it'll follow through. And so that's really important when you're sort of working with this because now I can sort of move it up and down here without it having to go inside the shape, and I can start putting that out there. So a really good strategy when you're modeling is finding out where the patterns are and then seeing what you can actually sort of duplicate around. So these are slightly different, but most of them are the same. So even with just one sort of standard in there, I could just start duplicating, resizing, and rotating to get some variety into this model here. What I'm going to do before I start doing that though is just like we did with the whole sort of shape here, because I want this to be textured on both angles, not just this one. If I hit Control E on this again, and then left click and drag out, then now I've got a solid object. So now it doesn't matter if I rotate it this way or that way, it's still going to have faces that I can texture and illuminate on either side. So once you've got that, feel free to then just start, just duplicating it around the place and placing it over your building. Because, this is a very easy way of just being able to create what looks to be quite a complex model with little effort. What you could do is you could even duplicate it, move it across, and then if you wanted to add some variety to it, select one of these edge loops and then just move it in slightly if you want to put in a dent. Or if you select more than one, like that, you could rotate it that way and just move it in like that, just so it gets a bit of variety there. What I normally do is I keep one master just safe over on the side there, and then I just start duplicating others around and then just start rotating them and just adding a bit of variety to it and everything, just so it doesn't look all the same. The eye picks up on repetition quite a lot, so if you can hide that repetition by just rotating and resizing and moving around, you can actually create most of this model just with these one piece and everything. So just have a go at that now, just sort of modeling and moving them all around the place. I'm just going to go around and make sure everyone's up to that point and can do that. But if you're already up to that point and you've done that, keep progressing around and making those sort of shapes and everything. It should take you a bit to get around the whole thing. And then we'll start looking at the doors and windows. And then finally we'll finish up by looking at the tires and the bricks that are on the top of the roof there. Cool, so I'm just going to go off mic for a bit just to let people have a go at that. And then we'll come back and we'll look at those other two shapes. Okay, so most people have got sort of a hang of that and just getting those ones around. If you haven't got the whole building covered yet, don't stress, because we can do that later. Really what I want to look at now is just first doing this window, and then we'll look at the doors. Okay, so just here on the window, we're just going to create a cube, just like that. It's probably going to appear in the center of the room there. Just going to pull it out to the side here, and then across, and then up. So we've got two windows here that sort of open up. So I'm going to tap spacebar, and spacebar is going to bring up this view here, which is kind of like our side and front view or orthographics. And we're going to use that as a guide to line up our window so that we know this matches up. I'm just going to shrink it down a bit. I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it and pull it over. As you can see, okay, there's a bit of a gap here. So I'm actually going to delete that one. Going to select face here and just pull this over a little bit, just so it's a little bit closer. And then we're going to shrink this down in this 3D view here. It's about the same thickness, if not a little bit thicker than the walls. Like that. And then I'm going to press Shift D again and then move it over. And that's actually pretty close to that and everything. We're not going for perfect here, just going for an approximation. And yeah, that's that. So now that I know that that's there, I'm actually going to delete this one, because what we're going to do is we're going to model this one first, and then we're just going to flip it over to the other side just to save us time. Okay. So if we look back at our reference here and everything, you can see that this door is made up of these little sort of squares in the center here, and then it's got these extra parts on it here for the actual handles there. So we're just going to do the same thing. So back here in Maya, just going to grab this one. I've got to go back to my edge loop tool. Got to double click on this, make sure I've got relative distance from edge selected, and then I'm just going to left click here to create a loop there, left click down here to create one there, create one here as well, and then one here as well. And then I'm just going to create my cross section here, like so, like that. Again, it's probably not perfect, but that's okay. I'm going to right click and select face, and select these faces here. And then I'm just going to go Control E, and then left click and drag on this arrow and pull in like so, like that. Okay. Now again, if I want to be really fancy, I could do the same on the other side here, but you don't have to, because again, this is just a model that we're looking at from the outside. But it could help if you ever wanted to pull this further. You'll notice if I keep pulling this, it'll go black, so you just want to be careful about how far you pull this in. Like that. That'll be fine. And that's there. So that's really all we need to do for that part of the model there. But just to show you how to flip this around, if I press Shift D, in fact we don't really have to flip it around, we could just probably just move it to there. But if I did want to, I could press D on the keyboard to move this sort of center point in the widget. Move this across so this lines up perfectly to this edge here, and press D again. And so now you'll notice that this rotates on that widget there. And then I can just go up here to this, and because this is on the Z axis here, if I go to here to scale and turn that into a minus value, basically what it's doing is scaling this inside out and then flipping it the other way. So I'm just going to put in a minus there, and then I know that those are flipped over like that. Okay, might even just move those widgets just by pressing D on the keyboard, or insert is another way you can do that. And then on this one, same thing, just move this over to the hinges, just so that now when I rotate them, they actually open up the way I want them to. So I know that's not how it looks on the model, but that's okay, I can leave that there as a detail, we can fix that later if we wanted to. So yeah, so we'll just have a go at that, and just sort of getting just this window sort of done there and everything. And then we'll start looking at the door. The door itself is a bit simpler in its structure. It's a bit more complicated when it gets to the handle. So we'll have a look at that as well. And then we'll finish it off just by getting the tire and the bricks on top of the roof, and then duplicate out the rest, and that should get us to the end of this. Okay, so most people have got that and followed that through, which is really good. So what we want to look at now is this door, and then we're going to look at the handle. So the handle is going to involve using the cylinder tool and then just curving that around or extruding that out. So we could use the curve tool. I'm just going to leave that for another time and we'll look at that later. So we're going to do the doors pretty much the same way we just did the window. So I'm going to create a cube, just either by clicking here or going polygon primitives, create a cube. And then we're going to move this across, move it across, move it up, using this as a bit of a guide here, moving it across, moving it up, moving it there, down and up. So we're just getting that into position there, scaling it out, and just so it sits there nicely. Cool. Then I'm going to go Shift D, bring this out. Okay. Move that there, move that across, move that across, move that across, move that there, and there, across. And I'm just basically putting in the handle sort of plate there. If we look at the reference, it's kind of, I don't have it on this one, but it just looks a little bit nicer if you have a look at the render. I think they've put that in just as a texture. I'm going to put it in as an actual 3D part of it. Cool, like that. And then the last part is going to be that handle. So for that, I'm going to use a cylinder. I'm going to pull that cylinder out here. Going to change by clicking here. So if I click up here on this little pizza stack, and then just here on this one, go to subdivision axes and go to 10, and then move this up, scale this in, pull this out, scale this in, scale this up, move this across. Move this across like so. Okay, so now what we want to do is curve this around so it fits into here. Now this bit's going to be a bit tricky, but it should be okay. So we're just going to do it step by step. First thing we're going to do is extrude out, then we're going to rotate it, then we're going to extrude, and then rotate, and then extrude. I'm going to do it for both the top and the bottom. Just going to right click and hold, go here to face mode. I'm going to box select up here to get those top faces, and I'm going to hold down shift, left click and drag, and box select there, just so I've got those faces at the top there that I need. Then here on this side view here, I've got to press Control E. That's going to allow me to pull this out, and then I'm going to rotate it using the exact same widget, like that. Then I'm going to go Control E again, pull that out, press E, and then rotate, and bring it down slightly, move it across, and I'm going to press R on the keyboard. And what this is going to allow me to do is if I left click and drag on this scale tool here, all the way over to the other end, you'll see that it doesn't go any further. It kind of gets to that flat point and then stops. And then either press W or click on the move widget and then move that across like so. So just to demonstrate that again, I'm just going to do it on the bottom part here. So I'm going to go to face mode, box select, hold down shift, and then left click on here to deselect those ones. So I'm just left with that there. Press Control E, pull this down, press E, rotate, move across, press Control E again, left click and drag out, press E, rotate, move across, and then if I left click and drag on the scale tool, that should flatten that out like that very nicely. So that's going to go there. What I can do if I'm not happy with these curves is I can right click and hold to go to vertex mode and just start editing some of these vertices here, just until I get something closer to that sort of curve that I want there. It doesn't have to be perfect. That's why we sort of pick this sort of a structure and building and everything. It's really just about, when we look at it from a distance here, does that look like a handle? And if it does, happy days, okay? Now, what you may notice if you try and move this now is that everything doesn't follow. So the last thing we're going to do as well is click on this one, hold down shift and click on this shape, hold down shift and click on this shape here, and then go mesh, combine. And then I'm going to press D on the keyboard, move this across, and now when I try and rotate it, it should open and everything else should follow. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that there. and then when we come back, we'll then look at how to do the tire and the bricks. We'll duplicate the rest of these shapes around, and that should really get us pretty much close to the finish point, or at least all the shapes I wanted to look at in this lesson, okay? Because ultimately, you know, we're not going to do the whole thing just in this short amount of time, but as long as we know the main basic ingredients, from there, we can pretty much figure out the rest and get everything else done. So I'll be back in a second for everyone who's following along from home, and then we'll just get everyone else up on track. Okay, see you in a second. Okay, so for this last part, and we've only got a short amount of time left, so I apologise for that, but for this last part, what we're going to look at is just the tyre and the brick at the top here. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, just so I can hit that 8-minute mark, but if you want, you can always just sort of slow this video down and watch that again. So one of the shapes we're going to look at now is one we haven't really looked at too much. We did a bit in the dungeon, but it's going to be this pipe shape here. It's very useful because it already comes in with most of the things we need. So we're going to click here on pipe and then just pull that in. So this is already pretty much looking like the tyre, really. The only things we need to do is just change some of these inputs. So this input thing here, it's basically the script that's running to make this shape in the first place. So we can actually change this, so long as we haven't done anything like, you know, deleted that face there. If we try and change things now, it'll break a little bit and everything, so you got to kind of do this as soon as you sort of create it. But what we can do here is we can change things like its radius, we can change its height, we can also change its thickness. So if we're looking here at like a tyre, similar to what we've got here in this, like that, you can sort of see it's about that sort of thickness there. So we're gonna go to the thick point there. But the other thing we can do is we can actually round off these caps. So what that means, and I'll just show you just by switching that on, is that it basically, as soon as we increase this subdivision height here, it rounds, sorry, subdivision caps, it kind of rounds that part off there. So you get that kind of donut shape, if you will, or that tyre shape like that. So because these are tyres without sort of hubcaps in them and everything, just like we sort of see here, we can actually see inside these tyres here and everything, and I want to do that as well. So to do that, I'm just going to click here, hold down shift, and double click that, and then delete these both here like that. So we just got this empty tyre just here. And then we're going to go Control E on this whole shape, because that's been a current theme in this entire tutorial, and then just stretch it out like that. And then what we have is that tyre. That's easy. That's all we need to do for that tyre. So we can just easily put that up around the level, just to break it up a bit, just so that when we're seeing some of the same galvanized iron and everything, it kind of just breaks up your eye, so your eye doesn't pick up on that repetition, because, you know, our eyes are pretty good at picking up on that repetition, and when we see it, it has a tendency of just sort of looking a little bit too samey. So yeah, that's that. And the only other thing I'm going to look at for this end, just before we get to the end of the day, is looking at that cinder block. So for that, there's a number of different ways we could do that. We could in fact take that pipe and then just reduce down the polys until we get a square, but that's going to be a bit tricky, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. What I'm going to do instead is select both this top and bottom. I'm going to go Control E. I'm going to scale in on this part, scale in on that part, like so, and then if I delete that, I've got that interior and exterior there, and then gonna hold down shift, select these parts to select that loop, and then same on this one. And then I'm going to use another tool that we haven't really looked at yet, which is called the bridge. Basically what the bridge tool does, and you'll see in a second, is it fills in those holes there. So it needs to find the corresponding edge on the other side for that to work, but that is just there. And then I can just grab this shape. I'm actually going to delete this face, and then grab this one, press D to move that across, and then if I hit Shift D, and then scale this in and out, I've got that shape on the other side there. And then I'll just combine these. Move them across, move them up, move them there, move them there, and I can start sort of putting them around the level as well. Like I said before, good practice is just to have a master one off to the side, and then just duplicating this one, and then I can rotate it around, duplicate that, rotate that, move it down, move it there, move it across, move it up and everything, and just give the sort of whole shape a bit of texture. So now, even if I do have repeating sort of shapes here and everything like that, it sort of breaks it up a bit and just makes it like that and everything. So again, like I said, you can pretty much from here take it as far as you need it to go and to get a whole sort of shape and everything. I've had a very robust conversation today about, you know, modular packs and using the same assets. Yes, it does speed up time. Yes, it does make things a little bit cheaper. But the other thing you want to consider as well is that in a game engine, if you've got the same thing and you're duplicating over and it's just the one asset, it's also saving a fair bit of memory and space. So sometimes wherever you can notice those patterns and duplicate, not only saves you time, also saves space on the game itself, and also sort of saves memory on the processing side as well. So there's no shame in doing it. The only thing you've got to consider is, okay, if the eye picks up on repetition and I don't want it to look all the same, how am I going to make it look just that little bit different? And how am I going to sort of break up the eye so that it all looks a little bit different there as well. So anyway, if you want, stick around, see the rest of this getting modeled. Otherwise, we'll catch you later and catch you next time. If you want, obviously check out this guy's work. He's done quite a few. You can sort of click on here and see the other sort of models they've done. Check out Sketchfab just in general, because, there's some really cool things that people have done, and it's a really good way of just getting to know how they actually build some of those things. So if you see something on there that you really like and you look at that wireframe model and you're like, how did they do this and everything, then what you can do is just sort of start looking at the wireframe of that model like that, and then just be like, okay, well, how do they do this? Look at the wireframe, and then come back into class and be like, okay, how did they actually get some of those shapes there and everything? And then we can start sort of talking about that and how they model those sorts of shapes. But otherwise, we will see you next time. So thank you very much for joining us, and yeah, we will catch you either in class or online.